like thank you there. Hey there. So, Percy Jackson headcanons and theories. I'm blending the two together because sometimes the line between the two gets a little blurred for me. I see headcanons and theories as almost on a spectrum of sorts. Some wow, can't speak. Some theories lead more into headcanon territory, while some headcanons start leaning more into theory territory. So, let's just combine them all into one giant video. Giant with an asterisk. This is probably going to be a normal-sized video. I'll be saving the bigger ones till towards the end, so let's start out with something small and fun. Number 1. This one actually doesn't come from me, but I've seen it throughout the fandom, and I think it's really interesting, and that is that Roman demigods are not dyslexic, but dyscalculic. And this one would make a lot more sense than just having them be across the board dyslexic. Because the way Rick Riordan explained demigod dyslexia, though not really working like actual dyslexia, was that it was because their brain was hardwired for ancient Greek, which used a different alphabet. Well, we use the Latin alphabet in English, as you can see. So it doesn't really make sense for them to be dyslexic if we're following that train of logic. However, as I've seen it pointed out, we don't use Roman numerals. We actually use Arabic numerals, so if we were going on that train of logic, all Greek demigods would be dyscalculic too, but let's ignore that for now. We don't use Roman numerals, we do use Roman alphabet. So it makes sense for the Roman demigods to be dyscalculic. I also saw an interesting idea that instead of having them have ADHD just like the Greek demigods, to have them be autistic, which I think is an interesting thing. It's the idea that they're two similar neurodivergencies, but they are inherently different. Kind of how the Romans and Greeks are similar demigods, but are inherently different. Number 2. Again, not another one of mine, but when I read it, it was hilarious. I've seen it done by a few different people, so I can't give credit to any one particular person, but Wolf Jason. The idea that because he was raised by Lupa, he would have very wolf-like tendencies, which I think is a very interesting way of describing the character. Now, it doesn't fit in canon. He doesn't have any dog-like qualities to his character, at least not how I read it. But I think that would be a very interesting way to characterize him. Giving him these more dog-like attributes, I think, is really interesting. This idea of loyalty, of energy, all that. It's a very interesting idea. Alright, I know I was numbering these, but I'm just gonna let editor me put a number up here because I just realized that as I'm filming this, I'm just saying random stuff, and later on I'm probably going to want to cut some of it out. So, editor me, put in the number. There we go. Leo is an avid book reader. Now, this little theory of mine comes courtesy of Rick Riordan's inability to keep a consistent timeline. So, in Heroes of Olympus, Leo Valdez makes a lot of references. One that stuck out particular to me was his reference to the Hunger Games, which at the time of the book's release was a smash hit movie series. But if we went off the timeline of the books, it hadn't become a movie yet. It was still a book series, it was still around. So that made me think that Leo read the books. And it actually got me onto a whole train of thought. I'm going to go on this train of thought right now because it's really fun. So, I think that Leo was an avid book reader and really liked reading various books. I think the reason why he became a big book reader was that he spent a lot of his time in libraries. The reason why I think he spent a lot of his time in libraries is because of the abuse that he experienced in the foster system. Libraries were a safe haven for him. They were a place that he could just escape, and it was quiet, warm, safe. And there he read books. And I think that he particularly latched onto the Hunger Games because he could see himself in the main character, being able to see another era character like himself, even if he didn't fully understand his own sexuality at that point in time. I did just create a lot out of nothing there, I'm aware. This is where I said a lot of time fan theories go into headcanon territory. Took one little theory and headcanoned it into something new. But it really builds Leo's character for me, and I find it just a really, really interesting concept. I really like that it was Hunger Games in particular that he referenced, because I could draw that parallel between him and Katniss, and latching onto an arrow-coded character before you fully recognize your own sexuality it perfectly encapsulates Leo to me. Does Percy have a sister? This is an interesting question to pose, because there's no evidence for it, but there's no evidence against it, which in a way is kind of saying that there's no evidence at all, but you could make some inferences. You see, Thalia joined the Hunters of the Artemis in... I'm blanking out. Wow, I just zoned out right there. I need a second. Whoa. You see, when Thalia joined the Hunters of Artemis in the end of the Titan's Curse, it was to avoid the prophecy. Now, we know that they were all forbidden from having children, the big three, that is, because of this prophecy. But that doesn't mean they didn't have kids that were children of Artemis. Now, we know that they killed off their current living children to ensure the prophecy wouldn't happen. But Thalia isn't killed by joining the Hunters. Now, it could just be that they've accepted that she's alive, they've accepted Percy's alive, they haven't been killing any of them. It made me think, would they have killed any of the Hunters if they were their children? I have a feeling Artemis wouldn't like that very much, and it wouldn't actually matter if their children were Hunters because they don't age. It's not about how long you've been alive, but how long you've developed, essentially, considering the fact that Thalia was 15 because of the tree time slowing down her aging process, and then by joining the Hunters, she stopped aging, so she would never be biologically 16. This means that there could be children of Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades in the Hunters of Artemis. It's possible that Percy has a sister, that Thalia has a sister, that Bianca and Nico have another sister. They wouldn't even know. I'm trying to think of where I'm supposed to go with this. Now, there's no concrete evidence that any of the characters that we've met that were Hunters are children of the big three. We don't know Phoebe's lineage. We don't know Hunter's lineage. I don't think we even know another Hunter's name outside of Zoe and Thalia. But it's an interesting possibility that could sit there. Percy could have a sister, could have multiple sisters this whole time, and we never knew. I'm just now remembering that Percy has a mortal half-sister, so that intriguing intro made zero sense. Does Percy have a sister? Yes. Her name is Estelle. Whatever, I'm keeping it in. Alright, time to get into some of the juicy stuff. Is Nico a Roman demigod? Hear me out. He went to the Roman camp despite being Greek? Very strange. Now, you might be saying, well, he also went to the Greek camp, so doesn't that just negate that? But here's the thing. He was with his sister at the time, and they found his sister. So, obviously, they brought him in, too. They shared the same mother and father. They knew that. They knew they weren't half-siblings. Now, Grover said that he smelt 2 half-bloods. I think that they are capable of smelling Roman half-bloods. There could possibly be other Romans without them even realizing it there. And it's not uncommon for gods to have children with the same woman, but different parts of themselves. I mean, we've seen Jason and Thalia, a Roman and a Greek. That might explain why he is at the Roman camp, why his father would even tell him about it in the first place. It's because he never belonged at the Greek camp to begin with. He was not meant to be with the Greeks because he isn't Greek, he's Roman. Another interesting addition to that theory is Nico's Italian. Not Italian-American. Well, maybe. I don't know if he ever got immigration status. But he is Italian. He was born and raised in Italy. Now, which god do you think is more likely to be found prancing around Italy? Hades or Pluto? I think Nico is a Roman demigod. And possibly Bianca was too. I don't actually know if Bianca was born in Italy or she was born in America, because apparently their mom was a diplomat for America in Italy, which I do not recall at all. I just remember reading that on a wiki once. I do not remember that in the book at all. When was that in the book? I'm going off on a tangent here. So, Bianca, maybe Greek, maybe Roman. Nico, Roman. Definitely. Why half-bloods wear orange? Now, I've seen it mocked time and time again that these kids are fighting for their lives, that they barely ever make it to adulthood. And so the camp director sticks them in bright orange shirts. What a dumb idea that is, right? Is it, though? How many of you have ever been hunting? I never personally have been, but I do know there is a very important rule. And that is to wear orange. That way you're easy to spot for other humans, but the animals don't notice you. Now, this is because of the way we perceive color versus how other animals perceive color. It's the whole thing. There's a reason why tigers are orange. They hide great in grassland despite not being green. That's a whole thing. Look into it on your own if you're really interested. I find it interesting. Okay. Breathe. I think orange was an excellent choice, because my theory is that monsters don't have great eyesight, at least not the kind of eyesight we do. We already know that they track demigods based off of smell. And this is true across the board of all monsters, regardless of what species they are. The Minotaur, the Hellhounds, the Furies, they all use scent. So, if scent is their primary sense, then they wouldn't need as good a sight as we do. But still, why bright orange? It could be any other color. It's so that we can spot each other. Well, demigods can spot each other. How hard do you think it is to be on the run in the middle of a deep forest from a monster? You split up with your group and you have to find them now. You don't want to make too much noise. The monster might find you. But that bright orange sticking out around the foliage. You have found your quest mate. You know they're safe and alive, and you guys can find each other and get away and get to safety. Orange is actually a really, really smart choice for shirts. Now, that being said, because I know someone's going to say it, this is a Watsonian explanation, okay? A Watsonian explanation, not a Doylean. Doylean. I can't say the word. Ignore it. I know that Rick Riordan did not put that much thought into that. He just chose a color. But I'm putting the thought into it, okay? It's a smart and interesting theory, in my opinion. I've saved the best for last. Who is Ms. Kerr? No, seriously, who is Ms. Kerr? When we are first introduced to the whole series, that is one of the biggest mysteries we are introduced to, and it's left unsolved. Percy goes on a field trip with his class, and his pre-algebra teacher lures him away from the class, and it turns out she's a monster and attacks him, and she kills him with the help of Chiron, only to emerge out and nobody remembers Mrs. Dodds. They remember Mrs. Kerr. Percy doesn't, but they do. Who is Mrs. Kerr? And also, is it Ms. Kerr or Mrs. Kerr? Because I honestly don't remember. There are a couple possibilities as to who Ms. Kerr is that I can reasonably think of. So, one possibility is a nature spirit or an older demigod that happened to survive to adulthood, had been hanging around the school and kind of following them on trips, so that if anything were to happen to Mrs. Dodds, she could take her place. Maybe Chiron called in a quick favor that he had with a nature spirit, and that nature spirit came running down. It would have to have been a wind spirit. It couldn't have been a dryad or a naiad, if I'm saying that one right, because they're stuck with their trees and their water. But there is a darker theory, one I kind of like. It's messed up, but sometimes messed up is fun. I think Ms. Kerr was a visitor at the museum. We already know how powerful Chiron's ability with the mist is. He mystified the... Is that how you say it? Mystified? Misted? He tampered with the entire school. Not a single person remembered who Mrs. Dodds was, but they knew who Ms. Kerr was. They knew who Miss Kerr was. Is it really so much of a stretch that he saw a woman on his way back and just chose her to be Ms. Kerr? He misted her into thinking she was the pre-algebra teacher to these 6th graders. She could have just been a woman by herself at the museum. And he took her from her life to maintain order. I mean, if you have a better theory as to who Ms. Kerr is, I'll listen, but I don't think anything could top that. That makes sense, and it's messed up, and it's really interesting. Well, that's it for this video, but hopefully I'll get to make more theories soon. I'm going to be revisiting the series for a little bit and going through it again, so I might come up with some new stuff. That's why I came up with Mrs. Kerr, actually, because I was rereading The Lightning Thief, and I was just like, huh, who is she? So maybe I'll get to come up with more interesting stuff in the future. Until next time, I will see you later.